Okay, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And we're just going to walk through our meeting protocols and agenda before we get started today. So let's go ahead to the next slide. Okay, just a reminder to keep your mic muted unless it's your turn to speak. Another request, if folks don't have their full name on their screen, we'd appreciate that. It will just help us in terms of calling on people. So if you can adjust that if you don't already have your name on there. Whenever you wish to speak, please raise your hand. Virtually is preferred because we can see that. It pops to the top of the screen, but if you need to raise your actual hand, we'll do our best to track you down, and we'll call on you in the order in which you raise your hand. We do have interested parties joining us in addition to our RAC members. Interested parties are non-voting meeting attendees, and we invite you to observe, but you're not permitted to participate during RAC member discussion. We do have time for interested party comment towards the end of the meeting, and we invite you to participate at that time. So sorry. That's okay. Thanks to everyone who took a little time to speak with me prior to this meeting. It really helps for me to get to know each of you a little bit better as we enter this process. But I did have a few takeaways that I want to share, and then Kirk is going to respond to a few of them. So some of the key outcomes from the discussions I had, first was a lot of people wanted to know what was the process used to identify the proposed changes to the rule, and Kirk will walk us through that. The second outcome or theme was people wanting to understand the impetus for the proposed rule changes. So not only how were they identified, but what are the reasons for these changes? And I think as we go through each section, Kirk is going to explain the reasoning behind the proposed changes section by section. So we'll cover that. Third, there was some concern from folks about some of the sections of the rules that are being cut, and we sent out a couple of crosswalks for two sections today, one regarding the removal of sediment behind tide gates, one regarding transportation, and Kirk's going to walk us through both of those today. And then finally, will the RAC or DSL consider any rule changes that aren't currently proposed in that track changes document? And so right now, I think Kirk's going to cover both the first bullet, what was the process used to identify the proposed rule changes, and that last bullet about rule changes that aren't currently identified. So Kirk, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you, Steve. Actually, I'm going to merge bullets 1 and 2 together a little bit, and then I'll jump to that last bullet. So the impetus for the overall impetus for proposed rulemaking comes from a statutory requirement. We are obligated by state law to review our general authorization rules once every 5 years. The last time we did that was in 2018. So here we are 5 years later, opening that rule. The rule changes that we did in 2018, I'll just mention quickly, were very, very, very small. The last time we really made a substantive changes to our rules goes all the way back to 2011. So that's why we have some fairly significant changes this time around, because it's really been a long time since we've done a hard look. But point being, this exercise is statutorily driven. So what process did we use to identify the rule changes? I guess you could say we used 5 processes. One is we reached out to our staff that administers the general authorizations around Oregon. We have 11 staff that do that. And we solicited their input on, as the practitioners, administrators of the rule, what sort of changes would they see as being helpful in administering the rule? What changes have they heard from their customers as they've applied the rule? What activities do they think aren't in there that we should add? now, are there any activities that are in there that maybe don't have those minimal adverse effects that's required that maybe we should remove from the rule? So we went through that exercise with staff actually all the way back in 2021. So we got a series of recommendations from staff. The second process we used was we hired a Hatfield fellow back in I'll say 2017-ish. She contacted nearly all of our customers for general authorizations over the previous 5 years. So like literally 100 or more people that she spoke to that had actually pulled general authorizations to get their input. How was the experience for them? Were there things in rule that were problematic for them, etc. So that came into the mix, looking back at her recommendations, the Hatfield fellow. Third source was, well, me as a manager. I managed the administration of general authorizations for 5 years here at DSL. So as a manager, I had certain insights and things that were always sort of bugging me, if you will, that were in that rule. Let's see, fourth source is our rules coordinator, Danielle. Danielle went through them with a fine-tooth comb to fix a lot of grammar, syntax, language consistency problems. So while not necessarily very meaty edits, nonetheless very important edits for readability. And then the fifth source was from ODFW. DSL, myself, met with ODF staff last fall of 2022, to go over some specific issues regarding these GAs and to get their early input. We view ODFW as sort of a sister or companion agency to us in the administration of the removal fill law, and we do consult with them regularly as we are implementing our rules. So there are some specific issues we worked with them on. One of the issues you're going to see today when we go over the proposed changes that are on the agenda for this meeting. Last bullet then, so I'll stop there real quick. Any quick questions there? Impetus and process used.
And Kirk, as we discussed, I think as you get to different sections of the rule, you'll explain the reasoning behind
Yes.
specific changes, but that's kind of the overarching.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I don't see any questions. Oh, no, that's not a question.
Okay, no. Last point was, will the RAC or DSL consider any rule changes not currently proposed by DSL? So here's what we'd like to do on that matter. If we were to try and examine every section, every word, every sentence of the rule, we would be meeting with you all for the next year. I know you all don't want that. Heck, I'd get paid, so it's okay by me. But what we'd like to do is, if there is a section of rule where we are not proposing a change, where you think a change needs to be considered, we're going to ask that you reach out to me or Danielle directly first and talk to us about it and see if we can resolve it sort of on a one-on-one basis. If what you bring forward is worthy of a larger RAC conversation, then definitely we will bring it to the RAC at the next scheduled meeting. So again, if there's something, a rule section where you've got a problem, issue, or concern, reach out to me or Danielle first, and then we'll kind of go from there to see what the issue is. Okay.
That's the end of the PowerPoint.
Oh, okay.
All right.
So next we're going to get into the draft rule text itself.
Probably should share this
Yeah.
screen.
Yep.
everybody, or do I need to enlarge it?
Maybe enlarge just a little bit, if you don't mind.
You all can also enlarge from your end. There's a slide bar in the lower right-hand corner of your screen somewhere, so. One way or another.
Daniel, could you try to turn up the volume
Oh,
on the
yeah.
speaker
Yeah.
like we looked at before? It is horrible. Great. Okay. Oh, Chris has a question. Go ahead, Chris.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. This is one of those questions where I think I know the answer, but I thought I better check in. It's a process question, and I guess it boils down to, can we as RAC members share some of these proposed changes to the rule with our, in air quotes, constituencies, those folks that we might be representing in our sort of communities? Is that something we can do, or is it more that the rules making process is a little bit sheltered until things sort of solidify, and then that's the more appropriate time to share the information with our representative groups?
Thanks for that question, Chris. Unless Kirk or Danielle correct me, I think it's fine to share these proposed rule changes with your constituents. You do have all the proposed changes now, so our expectation is that each of you is able to act during these meetings in terms of our consensus building process, and you will not have to go back to those constituents after the meeting to discuss the proposed changes. So please just make sure you do that in advance of the meeting so that when we make decisions as a group, those decisions will stand. Does that answer your question, Chris?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
And to add to that, all of the materials from the meetings are posted to our proposed rulemaking site on DSL's website. So you can share that page with them or any of the materials from there. We will have a public comment period that will last 30 days. That won't be until after the RAC meetings have concluded, about a month after the RAC meetings have concluded. And so if they have anything particularly that they would like to say about the rules at that time, they can go ahead and submit those comments at that point.
Okay. Great. Well, then let's go ahead and
Let's do it.
start dig in.
Okay, all right. So just want to make sure that everyone is clear sort of on how we're going to be presenting the rules at each of our meetings. So the way it's going to work is this. After each meeting, so at some time after today's meeting, but before the third meeting, you will get an updated version of the rules that shows any or all changes that we discussed here today. You will also see in that next version of rule what I call sort of those bubble comments that you can do in Microsoft Word. And I will do bubble comments for the two rule sections that we're going to discuss at our next meeting, so as to explain a little bit why we're making the edits we're making in advance of us talking about them, just so you're a little better prepared. So again, sometime after each meeting, you're going to get an updated set of rules. You'll see whatever we discussed today, and you'll see for the next two rule sections, a brief explanation of why we're proposing to change what we're changing. That's not clear to anyone? Raise your hand. Try to explain that. Okay, all right. So I'm going to go through the general sections of administrative rule today. That's everything that leads us up to our first generalization on the topic of minimal disturbance. So these first sections of rule, internally, we kind of call them our preamble rules. They sort of set the stage on how we're going to use and apply the general authorizations. And importantly, they also establish the permit criteria that apply to any activity or all activities that are authorized under a general authorization. So I'm only going to discuss those sections of rule where we have an edit. And I'm not going to spend really any time at all on what I'll call non-substantive changes, like this very first one we're seeing, paragraph 3. This is stuff where we're just kind of fixing how we use abbreviations and defining them. The syntax, the grammar, the language consistency stuff, I'm not going to spend any time on, if that's okay with you all. So we can scroll down a little bit. Okay. Let's stop there. I'll just point out that's not a case there in paragraph 1 under process for establishing general authorizations. That edit, all we're simply saying is that you don't need to get any other kind of permit from DSL if you qualify for a general authorization from DSL. So we're just being more comprehensive and listing all the other permit types that you don't need. That's all. Non-substantive. Yep. Okay. So, as I mentioned before, statute requires us to review the rules once every 5 years. Well, our existing administrative rule is not consistent with statute, because right now in our administrative rule, it says that we'll review the rules on or before March 1, 2016, period. Well, that doesn't make any sense. 2016 is long gone, and statute says once every 5 years. So we just modified the language to have it comport with statute. That is all.
Any questions there? Okay.
Catch up with my part of this. Okay. Project applicability. This section talks about some of the limitations of where a GA can be used and where it can't, broadly speaking. One of the places where you cannot use a general authorization is if your project is in a state scenic waterway. That's already in rule. It's already in statute. All we did was add a rule reference so people can look up and read more about where the state scenic waterways are. Easy peasy. Paragraph 1B, that is our first substantive edit here. Department of Justice and US EPA reached out to DSL last year to tell us how much they hated one part of our rules regarding general authorizations. And it is, I'm going to stand up for a second. It is the part of rule that says, hey, if DSL fails to respond to your application for general authorization within 30 days, if we fail to act in any way, then you can go ahead and assume you got a permit and you can go do your work. So that's a big problem when it comes to Portland Harbor. Portland Harbor, by the way, is the Willamette River between river miles 1.9 and 11.8. It is a federal Superfund site. I think many of you already know that. US EPA and Department of Justice, as part of their work on the big cleanup efforts there, tell us that we can't have a rule that allows somebody to do work in a Superfund site without DSL expressly giving them an authorization, handing them a piece of paper. So that clause and rule that says, if we don't respond in 30 days, just go and do the work. Yeah, can't do that in Portland Harbor. That would be a violation of all kinds of agreements up there. So we've now put into rule this clause. You cannot apply for a general authorization if you're in the Portland Harbor Superfund site. So, you know, we only get about 4 applications, general authorization applications per year in Portland Harbor. So it's not a commonly used tool. All it really means is Those 4 customers per year would now most likely move over to our individual permit process.
Any questions about that change? Or concerns? Okay.
Okay, all right. Under 1B, it is already in rule, it is already a part of rule that says that if you have a project that's in something called an aquatic resource of special concern, you cannot apply using a general authorization. You have to use one of our bigger, more detailed permit processes. You can see in that rule, it's those aquatic resource types are spelled out there, and they're defined in much gorier detail on our website. So that's already in rule now. The only edit we're really making here is changing the word restoration to improvement, because we've changed the name of a couple of our GAs and taken out the word restoration. So that's really all we're doing there. But if there's anyone that's got a question on those aquatic resources of special concern, let me know.
Go ahead.
I should mention that the reason why those are of special concern is because they're generally either very, very rare wetland or waterway types in Oregon, or they are wetland and waterway types that are extremely difficult to replace. That's why we call them out. We don't see them very often proposed. Okay, yes, thank you.
Do you want to stop on that?
No, that's non-substantive. I'm just going to catch up with my notes here. Okay, so combining activities. So this first paragraph under section 5, we've added a new statement. And it says this: any general authorization may be combined with a notification for exempt voluntary habitat restoration as described in Division 85. So let me explain that. In Division 85, we exempt 8 kinds of habitat restoration projects from needing any kind of permit from DSL. So what this rule change says is, if you have a project of which some element of it is exempt habitat restoration, and another element of your project can be covered under general authorization, then you can stick those 2 things together and get one coverage for your project. It's just a very simple concept.
Any questions about that change? Not seeing.
Okay. So second way in which you can combine activities. If you have a project that can be covered by using 2 different general authorizations, we have modified the rule to allow you to do that. Right now, our rule is somewhat restrictive on using, we call it stacking, but basically using multiple general authorizations to authorize one project. And we've really opened that up now. You can use, with one exception I'll talk about, you can stack any number of GAs together to get your project authorized. The only GA that we're proposing that you cannot, I'm sorry, let me stop there and give you an example. A classic example is someone needs to do some stream bank stabilization work on their property. Okay, that's coverable under a general authorization. However, they also need to cross a wetland to get equipment to the project site. So they have to lay down mats or temporary fill in the wetland for a little while they're building the project. That activity is covered under the temporary impact general authorization. So what we're saying is your one project, just you can get 2 GAs to authorize the 2 combined activities. The only GA that we're saying you can't combine with is the minimal disturbance general authorization. And that's because the whole point of the minimal disturbance general authorization is that it's minimal. It's no, right now, we're saying no more than 4 cubic yards of activity. We are proposing to expand that a little bit. But the point being, activities are really supposed to be minimal, so we don't want to see a lot of stacking of other activities on top of it. One exception is if you do need a temporary impact GA to get to your project site, okay, you can still use a temporary impact GA to get to your minimal disturbance site. So I'll stop there. That might have been a bit confusing. Overall, we've given you more opportunities to get your projects authorized under GAs by stacking.
Questions for Kirk on that or concerns about the proposed change? All right, Kirk.
All right.
Number 6 there.
Number 6. So what we're yeah, this is just a simple clarification. So you can't, what you cannot do is if you have a project for which part of it fits under a general authorization, but the rest of it does not, like it would have to be an individual permit, then you just need to go get an individual permit. Forget the whole general authorization. So we just tweaked this language a little bit to make it just a little bit more clear. It's not really a substantive change.
All right. On to fees.
Oh, fees. Everybody loves fees. Okay. So as it stands.
Sorry.
Oh.
The tricky mouse.
Yeah.
It is, it's very sensitive.
There we go.
Okay, so right now, the fees that we are allowed to charge are dictated by statute. Specifically, statute says that we can charge no more than $250 for processing a general authorization request. So that's state law as it stands today. State law also says a few more things elsewhere. It says that we can't charge any fees for flood and erosion control projects. Okay, so that means that we can't charge a fee for a bank stabilization GA because that is always for flood or erosion control. So we'll never charge a fee for that GA. There are statutes that says we will not charge a fee for voluntary habitat restoration projects. Okay, then we cannot charge a GA fee for our waterway enhancement GA nor our wetlands enhancement GA. There's a statute that says we cannot charge anything for projects less than 50 cubic yards. All right, well, then we cannot charge a fee for our minimal disturbance GA. So once you parse through all that, what it really means is there's only a couple of GAs we can even charge a fee for. And that is the temporary impact GA. If it's more than 50 cubic yards of temporary impact, we can charge $250. And that certain overwater structures GA that we're going to talk about next time, maybe 2 meetings, we can charge a GA for that. I've deleted, you can see I've deleted the GA for transportation and the GA for removing the sediment behind tide gates because we are proposing to delete those GAs all together. So of course we can charge a fee. A little bit later in today's meeting, we'll talk about those 2 deletions. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that there is a House bill that is proposing to allow DSL to set fees for general authorizations by administrative rule and not by statute. So just be advised on that. If that is passed into law, then at some point in the future, we will be having a rules advisory committee to talk about establishing fees for all our permit types through the rule process, but we will not be doing that today.
Questions?
Questions on fees? Not much we can do about them.
All right.
Let's go to, yes, pre-construction notification. So this part of the rule talks about basically, hey, if you want to get qualified to use one of our general authorizations, you've got to send us a pre-construction notification. What DSL has on our website is we have a notification packet that our customers can use. And basically it tells you right up front, hey, if you're going to use, if you want to apply for a temporary impact GA, then you have to fill out pages 11, 12, and 13 of this packet. If you want to apply for the minimal disturbance GA, you've got to fill out pages 4, 5, and 6 or something like that. People send that to us, and again, we get 30 days to review it. And either at the end of those 30 days, we're going to tell folks, your notification was complete, you told us everything we needed to know, and you align with what's allowed in the administrative rule, you're good to go. Or we might tell you, we don't have enough information here, you didn't fill out page 5, whatever it might be. Please send that in. Or we might say, well, we got all the information, but looking it over, you are outside the bounds of what qualifies for this GA, so you're going to need to apply using a different permit type. Okay, so that's sort of the background on our notification process. So this next change that I'm going to discuss is, I think, a very substantive one, and it's one that came forward in those conversations that I mentioned with ODFW last fall. And the point of this proposed change is this, is right now, applicants to us often get caught in a chicken and the egg situation, meaning most of the projects that we authorize under a general authorization also require fish passage review by ODFW. The problem is, folks often come to us first to get our approval, and then they go to ODFW to get fish passage approval. Well, as many times as not, when they go to ODFW for fish passage approval, ODFW needs them to tweak or modify their project in some way to meet state fish passage law. Well, the minute they tweak their project for fish passage, guess what? That's a different project than what we authorize. So now they got to come back to us again and get a new GA from us for that modified project. That strikes us as a little bit crazy and probably not good customer service. So what we are proposing is, if you need fish passage review, go and get that first. Get that approval or that waiver from ODFW, and once you've done it, then come to us and get the GA. Because it is highly unlikely that whatever ODFW approves would be changed in any substantive way to the GA process. So there's very low risk that DSL would ever have to send you back again to ODFW because of a change we need. That is just not common at all, since what we need is so clearly spelled out in the rule. So again, the idea is that part of your notification to us is you include or you attach a copy of your fish passage review from ODFW. And if it's in there, then great, you checked that box.
We have a question.
Oh, yeah, I'll stop there.
Tim, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, Tim Sauter, Washington County. I'm just kind of confused because it was my understanding that that's already required. I've had permit applications kicked back, general authorization permit applications kicked back because so Washington County has a programmatic agreement with ODFW for fish passage, and then that it was Anita at the time. She didn't see the typical form, so I mean I got it figured out. But my understanding that was already a requirement. And I talked with our district biologist, and he says they just get showered with permit applications, and they don't even know if the permit is doing anything related to fish passage, and so they have to sift through it. So I guess I'm just trying to understand, like, is this really changing anything, or what's the difference?
So you're right, Tim. Regardless, you always have to comply with the fish passage law. The way our rules read right now, we just have a condition that says you will comply with fish passage law, period. That's all we say. That's our feeling is that's not great customer service, because that doesn't really tell you much about where the hell in the process do I do that. And what we're saying is get it done up front before you come to us, so that you don't get caught in that do loop I described. If you guys already have programmatic approval for fish passage for a certain suite of activities, then that's fine. That would work for us as your upfront demonstration that you comply.
Okay.
I'm not sure, did that answer it?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I just thought it was already something you guys checked for, and we work very closely with our district biologist and have a great working relationship with him. And now it's something that he passed along to me, is that they're just getting permit after permit application, and they don't even know if the project triggers fish passage. So yeah, having applicants reach out to them first definitely seems like it'll help everyone out in the process. So good to know. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we sure hope and think it will. And just to help folks out a little bit further, we worked with the fish passage folks. Some of you might know Greg Apke at ODFW. And we went through all of the activities that we could conceivably approve in a GA and try to figure out, are there some activities which ODFW is comfortable just saying programmatically, they don't need fish passage review. You never need to come to us to check for this kind of project. So it was a laborious exercise, but in paragraphs, A through F on the page you're looking at are all the activity types for which you don't need to do that. Go to ODFW first to get fish passage review. You're already golden. Just come to us.
So I think that's what we're seeing, Kurt, is
That's
all new language.
all that new language. Yeah, I won't go through each one at a time, but the idea is that these activities just will never run afoul of fish passage compliance, because they don't raise a fish passage issue, because they're well out of the waterway, they're well out of the floodplain, etc.
Dave, do you have a question?
On that note, Kirk, I'm looking at I guess it's sub 1, sub A, capital B, certain overwater structures, placement and removal within endangered salmon habitat. Are you talking about private docks there, recreational docks?
So that GA will talk about residential recreational docks. I think we're going to delve into that one at our August meeting, if I recall correctly. But yes, it does talk about residential docks. It also talks about, in a few cases, commercial docks.
Great, thanks.
And Brian?
Thank you. So I have a comment around, I guess it's subsection C, temporary impacts to wetlands and waterways for certain activities. A lot of the clean water services, excuse me, infrastructure projects work within wetlands below ordinary high. Given that ordinary high in our district extends across broad floodplains. And so previously we haven't had to get fish passage plans for temporary impacts within wetlands that are in our floodplains that fall below ordinary high. And so this will be an increase in the ODF&W workload. And it sounds like there are opportunities, maybe even existing examples of sort of programmatic ODF&W fish passage waivers for activities that I'm excited to hear about. But I just wanted to make a comment that this will, at least from our perspective, will increase the engagement with ODF&W, but may not increase the numbers of fish passage plans that are provided with the work associated with our projects.
Right, yeah. So Brian, it might behoove you to have that conversation with Tim and see what they did in Washington County with some of those programmatics. Because it does seem like a way to, alleviate some effort there in the long run.
All right, did that answer your question, Brian? Or comment?
Yeah, it's more of a there are broader impacts to ODF&W for their workload. And so anticipating that this is going to significantly increase the amount of requests for fish passage plans because the project types that are currently getting approved under by the Department of State Lands may not be getting fish passage plans or needing them. So I just, I guess, making a comment more about the workload at ODF&W will probably substantially increase associated with this.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't, Nancy, is that anything you want to comment on in terms of workload for ODFW?
Not to comment on the workload. I do know in coordination with Greg Apke that fish passage is required in floodplain areas in specific scenarios. So they would like the opportunity to be reviewing those.
So, yeah, so Brian, I think the little bit of the irony there is, all these projects already required fish passage review. That maybe the problem is some number of them didn't go for fish passage review, for which we are now going to catch those to make sure everybody that requires fish passage review gets it. So yeah, that could result in some workload implication.
Good question in the chat.
Okay.
What are spud piles?
Oh, okay.
What are spud piles and is ESH essential salmon habitat?
Good. Thank you, Chris. Yeah. Gosh, my use of jargon. So spud piles have nothing to do with potatoes, although our director is contrary. A spud pile is a pile that's used to anchor a barge, especially in flowing or tidal environments. So you'll see often they'll have 4 piles on the 4 corners of the barge, and they drop them into the bottom of the river or the bay to hold the barge in place. So it's a form of anchor using piling. And yes, ESH is essential salmonid habitat.
Is that defined earlier in the document?
Yeah, it's written out.
Yeah.
You don't have to scroll to it. I just want to
Yeah,
make sure.
it's
First,
earlier
this is
on.
defined.
Okay.
And if you want to see where all the essential salmon habitat waterways are in Oregon, we've got a very detailed map on our website. You can take a look at that.
Okay.
All right, let's go to the very bottom then of this page, number 2 there.
Wait.
So the other thing, so we've always required that if your general authorization involves the placement of a fish screen, like to screen fish so they don't get into a ditch or into a pipe or whatever, we've always said that you need fish screening approval from ODFW. They have an established review program for that. What we're proposing to do here is simply say that if you need a fish screen approval from ODFW, please get that before you apply to us. We are not the experts on fish screens. We don't know if what you're pitching to us will be compliant with fish screening law. So way better for all of us if you get your fish screen approval first. just like getting your fish passage approval.
Nancy?
So I coordinated with our fish screen passage staff after reviewing this language, and they'd like us to add 3 words to that line, please, so that it says documentation of fish screen approval or other documentation from ODF&W. And that's in order to allow more flexibility in project timing.
That's all right, just, that'll work.
Got it?
Document
Yeah.
or other
sorry,
documentation.
we on track changes just so that it's captured.
Okay. Thank you, Nancy.
No, thank you.
While Danielle's doing that, just want to make sure, does anyone have any questions or concerns about that addition? Okay. Or any questions or concerns about this subsection B? Okay.
Top of page 5.
We're on page 4.
Oh, okay, let's go to the top.
Oh, wait, no, I am on page
Yeah, you're on.
5.
Yeah, there we go, number 2. So number 2 is a new language, and it simply says now that if you need fish passage review, if you need fish screen review by ODFW, and you didn't include it, the results in your application to us, then we're just going to send your application back to you. Just kind of reinforcing how important it is that we see that you have those approvals. That's all.
Questions about that? Concerns? Okay. Next up is 3C.
3C, which is actually, 3C is non-substantive.
Okay.
We're just trying to be more inclusive of all our permit types there, that's all. 5, oops, let's get back to 5.
There we go.
So right now, rule says that if you don't hear from us within 30 days after submitting your application, it says you can begin your project. Well, we know that's not really quite right, because chances are you need approval from somebody else beside DSL. So we don't really have the authority to tell you can begin the project. The only thing we have authority to say is that if we don't say anything to you, you can assume that you have removal fill authorization, because that's the only thing we control.
Questions about that? If not, we can move on to B.
Let's see, what was B? Yeah, again, that statement is added just to be clear. We may not be your only regulatory agency involved. So you might still need something from other local, state or federal agencies.
Okay.
Next paragraph, paragraph 6 is a new one. This one is being done for strictly our benefit, and it's as simple as this. Right now, if we issue a general authorization approval to someone, and a month later they come back and say, oops, I had to change something on my project. Well, the way it works right now is we have to open up a whole new record number in our database system and treat it as a new application, basically create a double record in our database. This paragraph simply allows us to use the same authorization number that we issued the first time and just modify their authorization without assigning a new number to it. Very bureaucratic. It just saves us a lot of headaches.
And it's used, that would be using an already described process
Yes.
to make that
Yeah,
determination.
again, it's at 30, we'd have up to 30 days to look at what your modification is and make sure you're still within the bounds of the rules for a GA.
Any questions or comments there? All right, let's keep moving.
No, that's all. Okay, yes, so let's stop there. The general conditions. So these are the conditions that apply, that every project that gets a general authorization has to comply with. So these conditions are in addition to those conditions that we'll see in each individual general authorization when we start talking about those next week. So these are sort of the generic ones, if you will. All of these changes, or I'd say the vast majority of these changes, are simply to align our general conditions here with the general conditions that we use for all our other permit types, and just sort of bring our general authorization sort of up to speed with all our other permit types. So the first change is adding a condition that says you got to get local government approval before beginning your work. We tell that to every other permitting type we have. We really should be telling it to our GA folks as well. I think that's pretty straightforward. Number 4 is a new one. The lower Willamette River, specifically the area roughly from the Selwood Bridge down to the confluence with the Columbia River, is termed the lower Willamette River. And there is an adopted management plan of what's allowed to be done in the river in that area. And that management plan exists as Division 80, 141-80. So what we're saying here is your activity, if you're going to be pulling a GA, we're going to make sure that it's compliant with what the lower Willamette River management plan says is okay to do in the Willamette River. It's as simple as that. The plan does allow, has some flexibility to allow for minor exceptions. So we're going to allow that here. So if you need a minor exception to apply with the lower Willamette management plan, that's okay. You can still get a GA. If you need a major exception from that river plan, that's a huge process. It takes way more than 30 days. GA will not work for you.
Questions or comments about these additions? Okay, not seeing any.
No, you're seeing a strike through number 4, archaeological resources. We're not deleting it, we're just moving it further down. So you'll see it come up again a little bit later. We've also updated it. SHPO's given us some slightly better language to include there. Ditto with fish passage requirement. We're not deleting it. We all know fish passage compliance is required. We've just moved it down. Work period in jurisdictional areas. All of our permits.
Pause for 1
Oh,
second.
sorry. Yep.
Oh, the hand disappeared.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead.
All right.
Sorry.
All of our permits and waterways come with a specified time period in which you need to be doing your project. It's called the in-water work window. Every river and stream in Oregon has an in-water work window. Usually that window is somewhere in the summertime, roughly. Out on the coast, it's often in the wintertime. And that's the time of year when it's safest to do a project without adversely affecting fish. So the change here, it's always been a requirement that you work in the window. That's nothing new. All we've done here is 2 things. We've added for activities below ordinary high water, that's our jurisdiction in regular flowing waters. We've added highest measured tide elevation because that is our line of jurisdiction in tidal environments. So it's just a clarification. And then we've added a specific reference to which version of the in-water work windows you need to be using, which published document. So we added a more specific citation. So not a substantive change, really just clarifying.
Brian has a question.
I'm 2 questions 2 questions, please. The reference to ordinary high water line has the line struck out. However, the references in OARs to the definition for ordinary high water is referenced by ordinary high water line. And I'm curious if that's now associating it with the elevation, the term elevation. Highest measured tide elevation is the last part of that sort of sequence of words, ordinary high water or highest measured tide elevation. So it seems to imply ordinary high water elevation is the jurisdictional reference. And I'm curious if you could clarify that. And I noticed that ordinary high water is referenced throughout the document versus ordinary high water line. I'm hoping that you can explain that.
Yes, I think what you're proposing, if I'm hearing it right, Brian, we had a leaf blower go by for a minute, is maybe we should better say ordinary high water elevation or highest measured tide elevation. Because I sort of jammed the two concepts together there. We didn't mean there to be a substantive difference between a line and elevation. Danielle just told me I had to pick one or the other for consistency's sake. So
I didn't mean with highest measured tide elevation. It was just there was lots of references to ordinary high water throughout the rules, and sometimes it was modifying something. Sometimes it had lines, sometimes it had marks, sometimes it had elevation. So my recommendation was just for consistency. So yeah.
My recommendation would be to utilize the reference in OAR 141 085 0510 71, which is to ordinary high water line, and is not an elevation related demarcation. So it feels important for it to refer to the definition that's in rule.
yeah, great catch. Yeah, Division 85 uses line, then we should be using line here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll make a note that we will remain consistent with 85 and also 90,
right.
which uses line. So, yep.
Great. Thanks. Good catch, Brian.
Thank you.
I have one other question about the reference to the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife guidelines for timing of in-water work. In previous conversations with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, their recognition of the ordinary high water line has not been the boundary necessarily for application of the guidance around in-water work period. And so there might need to be some additional clarification between ODF&W and Department of State Lands on when do the guidelines for timing of in-water work apply to projects to ensure that there's consistency in that application.
Okay, maybe that's a conversation that Nancy and I can have. And I might need to follow up with you, Brian, to get a little clarification.
Sure.
Kirk, why don't we just flag this section and we can come back at the beginning of next meeting before we get into the next section we're going to work on and just revisit that. And, and yeah, so no final decision made here, but.
Do you want me to highlight it at all, or?
Yeah, I think just something simple would be helpful. Or maybe later you can put a comment in that says.
I was just gonna
You
do a
visit
comment
at
that says.
July meeting. Or RAC meeting.
Oh, hit that button.
All right, I think our next edit is on the next page.
Yeah, all the way to H.
Here we go. Okay. So all erosion control structures must be removed when a project is complete and the soils are stabilized and vegetated. So this is a situation that some of our staff have run into with permittees when we go out to assess compliance with their general authorization. Sometimes we will see that the permittee, they completed their project, great, their general authorization expired, that's fine, but their erosion control measures are still in the ground. Most commonly, they're silt fences. Now we got a problem because if those silt fences are in our jurisdictional area, they can't remove them without another authorization from DSL. Well, that's crazy in our opinion. So this sentence tries to fix that. It simply says that if you need to remove your erosion control measures after the expiration of your general authorization, it's okay. You can go ahead and do that without further approval from DSL. Simple as that.
Any questions or concerns about that addition? Okay, 11.
11, yeah, so there we are bringing back the archaeological resources condition. It's the language given to us by SHPO. It's the language that's in every other permit type that we issue.
Maybe we pause for a second, make sure people have a chance to
Sure.
review that language. And if there are no questions, number 12.
12 is simply a condition that is in every other permit type that we issue. So we're just trying to get our general authorizations consistent with that. Folks are required to show us what their construction footprint or corridor is as part of their application to us. So what we're saying is we've got to honor that and stay within that corridor footprint. Simple as that.
Okay, if there's no questions, let's move on.
So that's now 14. We just added other examples of waste types like spoil material.
Okay.
13, we didn't delete it, we just moved it. You'll see it later. 15, operation of equipment in the water. Sometimes equipment does have to operate below the ordinary high water elevation to get a project done, whether or not there's flowing water. Every other permit type that we issue has this permit condition. So we thought we should really have it in the general authorizations as well. So this is stock language from all our other permit types. I'll give folks a moment to read it there. And I should mention that the second paragraph of 15 was given to us by DEQ as a recommendation.
So is this another area where we might be revising the language based on the previous?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's
Yep.
just, we'd be adding the ordinary high water line or highest measured tide elevation.
Chris?
Yeah, just real quick, I wonder what aquatic organisms mean. Does that mean every single organism in that work area, that isolated work area? I could imagine it could be pretty exhaustive if that's the case.
So from the water and aquatic organism salvage. So it would only be the salvage of those things for which a salvage permit covers from ODFW.
So for example, Kirk, would that imply that we are limited and only responsible or obligated for those things that are listed in that ODFW permit? I guess maybe my point is it seems pretty wide open and a little bit undefined, the way it's written.
Okay. Yeah, Chris, let me, okay, I see what you're saying. I think that's one where I want to have a sidebar with ODFW and then come back to the group with a potential proposed change to that language.
I think if you
Let's
move
we'll flag
the,
that.
yeah.
I forgot.
Yeah.
I still-
Yeah, good catch, Chris. Thank you. Never really thought about that.
Any other questions or comments about section 15? All right, are you gonna comment on 14?
Yep.
Yeah.
So we deleted that 14 is currently an administrative rule. We're deleting it from here, but we've moved it over to the GA that deals with temporary impacts. Because isolating a work area in a waterway is a temporary impact to that waterway. So that condition really belongs in the temporary impact GA. So when we talk about that GA, you will see it there.
Okay,
And then 16, there is the fish passage required, standard statement in all our permit types. We no longer needed condition 15 spoil disposal because I included the word spoil in the condition above when talking about waste materials. And then accidentally, I buried in that paragraph a condition 15 that says trenching in wetlands. If folks see that, it's struck out in green. That's another temporary impact. So that doesn't really belong here. It belongs in the temporary impacts general authorization. So we simply move that language there.
let's go through the other 17 and 18, and we can pause to see if there's.
Yep, okay. 17, that's just another example of a condition that we include in every other permit type we issue. So we're just getting our general authorizations caught up to our current standard. And 18, that's always been in the general authorizations. I just relocated it to the end of the list. That's all.
Can you scroll up just a little bit, please? All right, questions or comments about this last chunk of changes from 16 to 18? Right. Is that the?
So that's it for all the preamble rule stuff, which I think takes us to talking about the two proposed GAs for deletion.
I'm gonna pull up the crosswalks.
Oh, good, yeah, pull up the transportation one first. Okay, so right now in our
All right,
rule.
1 second, please.
Oh, okay, we're reading a chat here.
This goes back to the last one.
Do we have, or do we need a definition for spoil materials? Perhaps in the definition section, perhaps this definition could specify what are not considered spoil materials as well.
Sure, we can take a look at that, Chris. Catch it here.
All right, that's another one that we will revisit at our next meeting then.
Yep. Okay.
All right.
Cool. Okay. So, Department of State Lands is proposing to remove our transportation general authorization from rule. This is a recommendation that came from our staff. Our Hatfield fellow had also commented on what appeared to be a lot of duplication between what this GA authorizes and the same activities that can be authorized in other places in rule. So what this chart does is it briefly describes the 4 things that the current transportation GA authorizes. That's in the left column. And then in the right column, I've indicated if it were to go away, how would each of those 4 activities be covered? So let's take them one at a time. So this GA covers the removal of garbage, trash, and rubble from in and around transportation structures. And you can see it does it with a few conditions there. Well, DSL doesn't think we really need this covered as a GA for a few reasons. One is for many waterways in Oregon, any waterway that is not essential salmon habitat, you can already take out up to 50 cubic yards of anything and not need any permit from us. So 50 cubic yards, that's about 2 commercial garbage trucks full of garbage. So that's quite a bit of garbage you can remove without needing anything from DSL. But more to the point, the removal of trash, garbage, and rubble that's greater than 50 cubic yards or is in an essential salmon habitat waterway, it's already exempt as a voluntary habitat restoration activity in Division 85 with the same limitations that's in the GA. So we didn't see any logic to having a GA that covers removal of garbage, trash, and rubble since it's already going to be exempt. So do we want to stop after?
Yeah, let's
each
pause
one?
after each one. Any questions or comments about that aspect of the transportation GA? Give you a chance to get a glass of water there too.
Mhm.
Okay, then let's move on to number 2.
Okay. The second activity that's covered in this GA is large wood relocation from in and around transportation structures. So imagine kind of large pieces of wood piling up around a bridge bent during a high flow event, right? We've all seen that. ODOT, city, county, road departments really want to clear that material away. So this GA would allow that. Well, that's fine, except that activity is already exempt in a lot of other places in our administrative rules. Again, first of all, you can always remove up to 50 cubic yards from any non-essential salmon habitat waterway and not need anything from DSL. If you want to remove large wood greater than 50 cubic yards or in an essential salmon habitat waterway, it's exempt because that removal, if the activity poses a risk to transportation structures, it's already exempt in Division 85. And then finally, if you want to remove wood and place it somewhere else downstream because it's good for habitat, or put it in a wetland because it's good for habitat, you can already do that as a voluntary habitat restoration activity that is exempt. So again, we don't see any need to cover that activity in the GA since no matter how you slice it, it's going to be exempt by some other portion of our administrative rules. I will stop there for a moment, let people digest that.
Questions or concerns? Not seeing any. Let's move on to 3.
Okay. Investigative drilling, that is test holes and borings for the purposes of planning and designing transportation structures. Again, if we get rid of that activity, we think it can still be covered in a couple different places. First and foremost, the same rule applies. Up to 50 cubic yards of removal and fill in non-ESH waterways. You're free to do that without getting anything from DSL. And when it comes to investigative drilling, you have to do a lot of drilling to ever get to 50 cubic yards. You know, typically these are boreholes and test holes that are well less than a foot in diameter. If you need to do investigative drilling in an essential salmon habitat waterway, that's already covered in our minimal disturbance general authorization. Now, I will note that the minimal disturbance GA currently limits you to only 4 cubic yards. That's not very much. We're going to talk about that GA at our next meeting. And one of the things DSL is proposing is increasing that limit for investigative drilling to 10 cubic yards. The other thing I can tell you about that is in the last 5 years, DSL has only issued 11 general authorizations for investigative drilling under this GA. And of those 11, I looked at each one of them. 5 of those could have been covered under the minimal disturbance GA. So there are, over a course of 5-year period, there were 6 investigative drilling projects that would have had to have found a different permitting home in our system. So we're not talking about a lot of projects here. So I'll stop again, let people digest that.
Questions or comments? All right, let's go to number 4.
Okay, the current transportation GA allows you to replace a culvert.
Hey guys, can I jump in real quick?
Yep,
This
go
is
ahead.
Brad. Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I having some technical difficulties, so I had to call in. And it's tricky to get in there. Anyway, just real quick on the geotech drilling. A good example is
Only showing us a phone number, so we don't know who's talking.
Who is this again?
this is Brad Livingston with ODOT.
Oh, okay. Hey, Brad, sorry.
Go ahead, Brad.
Okay, so regarding the geotech drilling, the survey activities, the Abernathy Bridge used about 18 cubic yards removal fill to do their boring. And the Tualatin River for our I-205 project used about 10. So I think that 10 threshold is going to be really good. To capture something up to the size of a exploration in the Willamette River, that would be probably more like 20. So I don't know how worried you are of the effects of that difference. Maybe you scale it to the river, just something to consider. We welcome the 10.
Oh, scaling the threshold to the size of the river?
Right.
Okay. I think that's definitely a concept worthy of discussion by this group. I propose that we pick that up at the next meeting when we talk about the minimal disturbance GA and see if there's some way we can accommodate that. I do get what you're saying there. That the impacts of geotech boring in a tiny stream versus the Willamette River, yeah, there's definitely a different scale of impact involved.
Okay,
Okay.
thanks, Brad.
So culvert replacement for Fish Passage. Right now, the GA will cover that. However, it occurs to DSL staff that we already covered that activity in several different ways. Once again, up to 50 cubic yards, you are free to go without saying anything to DSL. If you need to maintain, reconstruct, or replace a culvert that's more than 50 cubic yards or an essential salmon habitat, you can do that. It's already an exempt activity in Division 85, as long as the footprint of the culvert and the fill doesn't increase by more than 20%. And then guess what? Even if it does increase by more than 20%, the activity is still going to be exempt under the waterway habitat general authorization. So again, our feeling was no matter which way you slice it, if you're replacing a culvert for fish passage purposes, there isn't already an exempt home for you.
Tim. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay, yeah, thanks again. I'm Washington County. As I mentioned, we do a lot of culverts. So this was our big concern on this whole process and why I'm here. First thing, 50 cubic yards, it sounds like a lot, and it is a lot to you or me, but it's not a lot with the way that DSL requires ordinary high, removal fill below ordinary high to be calculated. The vast majority of what is counted is actually part of the existing road. And when you're looking at historically undersized structures and going to replace them with something that's, 14, 20 feet size, those numbers creep up really quick. So that, saying that, oh, well, the 50 cubic yards, you can do it without even getting a permit, that's hardly any fish passage structure. It's just not. And then ODFW's rule changes are now require 1.2 active channel width plus 2 feet, which, whatever, it is what it is, and I'm fine with that. But the problem is that doesn't scale well. So on the low end, you're adding 2 feet to a active channel width stream of 5 feet, you're really never going to be under that 50 cubic yards. So I don't know what kind of conversations you've had internally with people who design these things, but that really just doesn't apply to fish passage structures. And then the other one is, and this may be more of a question for the Corps, but we obviously try to do a lot of our stuff under maintenance. And then, yeah, even if we bump up over that 20%, then there's the, the other general authorization. But, the problem is that the Army Corps' general conditions for Nationwide Permit 3 are that if you're going to impact, or if there's the potential to impact endangered species, that's general condition 18, then that kicks you out of their maintenance exemption. Well, the Corps doesn't have, they don't necessarily recognize your ESH map. So then you have streams that are mapped as ESH that trigger having to do a full pre-construction notification with the Corps, but then they're exempt from DSL's permitting requirements. So I don't know what kind of conversations you've had with them about it, but because of the, what we have to go off is that ESH map, right? But that's created by you guys and ODFW, but the Corps and more, really realistically, it's NIMS. They don't, not that they don't recognize that, but they don't base their stuff on it. So as soon as you get into ESH stream where, yeah, you're exempt under DSL, well, you're triggering, pre-construction notification with the Corps. So have you guys had conversations with them about that? Or we just go do pre-construction notification with them, but not have to do it with you? Because I literally have 2 projects right now that I'm having to go full general permit on them, their maintenance, they're under maintenance thresholds, but because it's ESH stream, it triggers the full process.
Right, yeah. So a couple of things, Tim. No, we, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't had that sort of pointed conversation with the Army Corps of Engineers regarding sort of the differences when it comes to culvert replacements. You are absolutely right. 50 cubic yards does not buy you a whole bunch when it comes to culvert replacement. But the bigger point being, if your culvert replacement is going to result in improvement in fish passage, then you're going to qualify for that waterway habitat GA. So why have it as a transportation GA? I can follow up with others here with like Bill Ryan, our deputy director. He might have more knowledge on what conversations might be going on in the Corps in terms of that. What you talked about.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm working on reaching out to them on, but it's that general condition 18 where if you may impact endangered species, that you can't do it under the maintenance exemption for them, but then we're basing that off of the state's map. So yeah, like I said, probably a question more for them, but please do consider it, because our deal is like, that's why we have our programmatic with ODFW. Like, let's just get as many fish passage structures done a year as you can. But when you get kicked from all these maintenance exemptions, and even when you have a programmatic for the passage itself, you get kicked into a full general permit. Well, that's less fish passage structures that we're able to do, basically.
Thank you, Tim. I appreciate that.
Yep, thank you.
So Kirk, is that a conversation you'll try to have?
That's a conversation I'll try and track down with Bill Ryan, but I'd say the onus of that's really going to fall back to Tim and what leverage he has with the Army Corps of Engineers.
Other questions or concerns about culvert replacement for fish passage? All right. Any other questions or concerns overall about this proposal to remove the transportation GA in light of it being covered in these other areas before we move on?
Again, noting Brad's
Yes.
concern or thought about scaling.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for bringing that up again.
You ready for me to switch?
Okay, let's switch over. Let's switch over to the ever popular removal of sediment behind its general authorization. So this is currently in rule. Folks are free to apply for it. No one ever does. So the statistic is, I rechecked our database. In the last 10 years, exactly 4 people have applied to use and gotten approval to use this GA. It is a difficult GA to get because it has many restrictions in it. And there are now so many other probably better ways to authorize this activity than when this GA was created, who knows, 30 years, 23 years ago. I'll also point out that in the last 3 years, no one's applied for this GA. Just so you know, the folks that have applied in the last 10 years, we had 2 Coos County landowners. International Port of Coos Bay applied one time, and oddly, the Lake Oswego Corporation applied and got one. I looked over that one. I'm not really sure that one was eligible, but I'll leave that as it is. In the handout that we sent out, by the way, I defined some terms just to help you. So tide gate, drainage ditch, etc. There's some definitions in there. So again, the left side of this table very briefly summarizes what can be approved under this GA. So it allows the removal and disposal of sediment, not gravel though. Really, it's mud and sands and silts from behind tide gates under certain conditions. The rule says that you can remove the material from either naturally or artificially created drainage ditches. Well, that's weird because there is no such thing as a naturally created drainage ditch in the DSL regulatory world. Drainage ditches are always artificially created by definition. So the rule already gets very confusing for folks to apply. If you're going to be cleaning out a ditch, it has to be within a hydraulically closed perimeter. That's probably the biggest why nobody applies for it. That is so restricted. What that means is no water. So the area involved that the ditch is draining is completely isolated by dikes, such that the only way for water to get in and out of the diked area is by pumps or through the tide gate. Well, that happens in the Coos Bay area, but it doesn't happen in a lot of other Oregon. Sand and silt only, can't remove gravel. It's very wishy-washy in terms of how much material you can remove. It does allow the removed material to be spread in adjacent farmed wetlands. Those are wetlands that have been put to some agricultural productive use. And just like every other GA, it's a notice-based approval. So we think that there are, for the couple people that may ever use this GA again, we think we've got some better homes for them on the right side. So the first one is exempt maintenance of water control structures. So that's in Division 85. Water control structures includes a tide gate. So you can maintain a tide gate, you can clean out material inside the tide gate. Water control structures also include, by definition, drainage ditches. So you can already clean out a drainage ditch or an irrigation ditch behind the tide gate without that hydraulically closed perimeter requirement. I'll note that exemption does not include natural waterways that have been straightened or ditchified, I guess is another term I've used. So true ditches, you are already free to clean them out back to their original design specification. The second home we have for folks is the agricultural. Oh, sorry, I'll stop there.
Lauren, go ahead.
Hi, Lauren.
Oh, hi. Yeah, no, my actual question was about the second one. And I was going to ask on the ag drainage ditch maintenance, if you actually had anyone use that exemption yet to clean behind a tide gate.
You mean the second one?
Yeah, if anyone had applied through ODA for the ag drainage ditch
Oh.
maintenance to clean behind a tide gate. Just
The
curious if
ODA,
anyone had.
yeah, so the ODA one is actually the fourth one down. So the
Oh,
second
yeah.
one down is our exemption. The fourth one down is the new ODA program, so I will get to it.
When we get there, that will be my question. Thank you.
All right. So the second one is an exemption for farmers for agricultural ditch maintenance. Again, that allows farmers to clean out their true ditches and not straightening natural waterways. But it also further allows them to dispose of that sediment on adjacent converted wetland areas. So it's spreading that material out thinly so they don't convert the wetland to upland.
Check our chat.
Yeah. You got a chat comment?
Big one. I missed a comment. 0650, it is important this rule support planting during the most appropriate planting period, winter, versus upon project completion. Recommend a revision. All temporary disturbed areas must be returned to original ground contours and seeded upon completion of ground disturbing actions and planted with woody vegetation if appropriate by February of the year following construction. Are we back into the?
Yeah, I've got it here. I've got it here. Let's see. So this is captured. So once the meeting's done, will I still be able to see that?
I can, yeah, I can.
Should we finish the tide gate and then come back? to
Okay,
this
yeah,
meeting?
so I was gonna
Okay.
say was, Brian, I need to kind of digest that a little bit before I can really respond to it.
Okay. Any questions about section 2 here in the tide gate, addressing the tide gate rule, GA? And if not, let's go to the third one.
All right. So another tool we have to authorize cleaning out allows people to clean out, farmers to clean out streams, including essential salmonid habitat streams, where sediment has built up to the point that it's affecting their agricultural production. That is a general permit. It does limit the amount that a farmer can remove is up to 100 cubic yards per year. I think it's per site or per stream segment. I forget the exact limitation. And again, it does allow disposal in converted wetlands. So there is an opportunity for farmers on a smaller scale to remove sediment from natural streams where it's causing flooding problems. Finally, sorry,
Is that still on number 3?
that's number 3.
Okay, let's check that chat just to see.
Oh,
no problem.
No worries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any questions or comments about number 3? There isn't a 3 there, but we know. Okay.
And Lauren, just so you know, we don't get a lot of applications for that one because the 100 cubic yards often isn't enough. And in fact, it became part of the impetus for this last program. And this is a new permitting program that was created by statute and is housed at Oregon Department of Agriculture. So it's not at DSL. So it was created by House Bill 2437 in 2019. It allows farmers to maintain channels, meaning either ditches or streams that are used for agricultural drainage. The channels must be routinely maintained to facilitate drainage, and it must have provided drainage within the last 5 years. So you can't go out and just suddenly decide that you're going to dig out a natural waterway because you want it to start working like a drainage ditch. It had to have already been used for that purpose previously. The channel has to be dry at the time you do the work. I will note that the 2019 legislation does require the development of a separate expedited permit process for farmers who need to do this work when there is water in the channel. I believe that work on that tool is supposed to begin in either 2024 or 2025. This agricultural drainage maintenance program of ODAs, they don't allow you farmers to clean out essential salmon habitat streams, so note that. And it does allow up to 3,000 cubic yards of removal per linear mile for the 5-year life of the ODA authorization. And finally, the program is being phased in Oregon over a 4-year period. If I recall correctly, the phase-in began last year, sort of in the northwest area of Oregon. This year, if I'm getting this right, it's phasing into southwest Oregon. Next phase is central Oregon. Last phase is eastern Oregon. So they're rolling this out over 4 years. So I want to jump back to Lauren's question. Lauren, I think your question is, do we know how many farmers have applied for this this ODA permit so far?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm just concerned if we're relying on this as one of the options, especially because it's one of the options with the larger amount of cubic yards. And it's, like you said, it has a phase-in approach and it's still new. I would hate to rely on it as one of the options to then eliminate this other one if it ends up not being something that works out.
Right.
Is where my concern is.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know, and I'd have to check with ODA. I suspect it's got to be somewhere on their website. They're really good about that stuff. I will check that, Lauren, and report back at the next meeting. I would guess that, see, it's 2023, so I think we're still in the first, maybe we're still in the first year of implementation.
Yeah, and I would suspect that of your examples of who has actually applied for this permit in the past, the farmers were probably a couple of my members. So that's where I get a little nervous about this one.
Yeah, understood. So I think we're still only in the first year of implementation now that I realize it's still 2023. So I suspect we're not going to see many permittees yet because it's just now that their ditches are going to be dry enough to clean out anyway. But regardless, I will look for you. Do keep in mind that we're looking at a total of 4 different avenues to cover what folks used to do with the Tide GA, and realizing that almost nobody ever used that GA anyway because it is so complicated.
Let's go to Chris next.
Yeah, thank you. I might be having an obtuse moment, but the 4th bullet from the bottom regarding the designated ESH streams, Kurt, can you help me understand why we would be concerned about this under a drainage channel maintenance section? So my struggle is if we've already said that ESA streams have certain higher permit requirements, let's say, it seems like agricultural drainage channel maintenance that's not an activity that's going to happen in these kind of streams, is it? When I think agricultural drainage channel, I think of ditches and conveyances that are generally artificial, as you mentioned earlier.
Well, do keep in mind that some of our ESH streams, if you go out and look at them, for all intents and purposes, you would call it an irrigation ditch. But that's because at some point in its history, it's been straightened. It's still being used by salmonids as some part of their life cycle, and it meets the definition for designation of ESH. It just might not look like your traditional salmon-bearing stream that you would expect. So, yeah, it can definitely happen that there is a need to clean out sediment in something that is designated as ESH.
Oh, well,
Sure.
I appreciate that explanation. Would you also tell me that there aren't a lot of miles of those in Oregon, hopefully?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm not even sure how I could calculate that one, Chris.
Okay, I won't hold you to it. Thank you, though, for the explanation.
Yeah, sure.
Nancy.
Hey, Nancy.
So I wanted to provide some clarifications because I actually work in the agricultural channel maintenance program. And for 2 years, people have been allowed to apply at the coast, first in the Northwest and now in the Southwest. There's been a couple inquiries for this kind of project, including behind tidal gates, and in both instances, the areas were too wet and provided habitat for essential sun-mounted habitat, so they would not have been eligible.
Okay. Thank you for that, Nancy. So Lauren, I hope you heard that. So it sounds like its usefulness so far has been pretty limited.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. I appreciate knowing that.
So Kirk, in summary, do you have any concerns about this proposal, considering some of the, what I think I'm hearing are limitations with this ODA?
Yeah, so my thought remains that, the ODA program is still in many regards in its infancy. We know that there's still a rule to come that will allow work in the wet under some conditions. And given that we still have 3 other ways that we can manage this activity, and given that only 4 people in 10 years had any interest in the GA, I'm still feeling like having such a complicated rule on the books just doesn't seem to be serving anyone well.
Questions or comments about this proposed removal of the removing of sediment behind tide gates? Kind of overall. John.
Yeah, just an editorial comment. Kirk, I was the one actually.
Nancy Taylor, can I help you?
1 second, yeah.
Hi.
Okay, go ahead, John.
Yeah. Just editorial comment. I was the one that applied for the Lake Oswego Corporation to remove sediment. And I will say that I kind of arm twisted DSL into issuing that GA, and I was very pleased about that. But the amount of material removed would certainly not fit into any of these categories because it was 22,000 yards. So it was a hydraulically, isolated area. We were removing sediment. And so they said in the end, yes, you did abide by their GA criteria, but I think removing this is fine from my perspective. We would definitely go the individual permit route next time.
Well, I'll tell you, John, and I've been the manager. 22,000 cubic yards of removal, there's no way you can get to a finding that the impact is minimal, which is the requirement of any GA.
Yeah, I put quotes around the word minimal.
So, yeah, that's the other thing we have to keep in mind, folks. With these, when we start talking about these really large amounts of sediment removal from streams, GAs have to have that straight-face test of having no more than minimal adverse effects. And when we're talking about thousands and thousands of cubic yards of removal, that starts to be a very difficult finding to make for us.
Anything else, John? No. Lauren, did you have something else?
No, I was just gonna say that with the information that I have today, I don't know what our expectation is for weighing in. So I may need some more time to reach out and figure out how my coast members feel about this one.
Say she needs time to reach out to you.
Yes.
Okay. Are you okay with revisiting this?
Yeah, I understand this is a big issue.
Okay. Well, let's say for both of these, if you have any additional questions or comments, we would definitely welcome those. You can send those to me in between now and the next meeting. And I think given the size of these changes, if there are substantive comments, we can revisit these two proposed changes to the transportation and the removal of sediment behind tide gate sections. Kirk, did you have anything else to present today?
That was it. Look at that, right on time.
For our RAC members, do you have any other questions or comments that you'd like to provide right now? And if not seeing any hands, our interested parties. Are there any questions or comments from our interested parties? Please raise your hand. Did you make that full screen or is it?
Yeah.
Close the. Any questions or comments from interested parties? Okay, Kirk, if you don't have anything else,
I
Danielle?
have a question. This is just kind of an administrative question. Would you like the next 4 meeting calendars sent all at the same time or individually? Go ahead and put that in the chat.
Okay, and while we're doing that, thanks everyone for your participation today. Danielle and I both recorded the areas that we're going to revisit at the next meeting. We'll be sure to put those on the agenda. And Danielle, can you remind us, without putting you on the spot, of what topics? I know the minimal disturbance we're covering next time. Any other
Temporary impact, I believe.
temporary impacts? So,
The high water line, which I think we're just gonna adopt as high water line.
Mhm.
And then Brian's comment,
scaling the riversides.
the
No,
scaling to
that's-
Riverside, but also the comment in the chat.
Oh, right. Oh, we were gonna do that right now.
Do you want to do that right now, or Kirk, do you want to take some
I
time?
want to take some time. I
Okay.
get what he's saying. I just need to think it through a bit.
Okay, we'll cover that next time then as well.
Okay.
Okay. Then if there are not any other questions or comments, as Kirk mentioned, before the next meeting, we'll send out a new track changes document that reflects what we've discussed today, and based in response to some of these conversations, any new proposed language. And we'll also be sending out a meeting summary and recording sometime soon. So thanks again, everyone, for your great participation, and we will see you in about a month.